Hey, this is Jurgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. This episode is about how to make yourself deeply depressed and miserable. And not only that, how to actually stay there and make it as permanent as you can. I'm a lucky bastard. For the last 23 years, I've seen clients professionally, and I've had the honor of spending time with a lot of masters of depression, people who really know how to make themselves miserable. And if you're going to do something, why not master it? Why not get really, really good at it? So these are the top strategies that my clients, the actual masters of depression, have taught me throughout the years. So if you master these ways of thinking, feeling, behaving, there's a really good chance that you too can become a master of depression and that you can learn to remain there more or less permanently. So let's get to this. If you're going to be depressed, you have to relate to life in a depressive way. But you have to never quite see that. Instead, you have to convince yourself that depression is a thing, that it is a disease, that it's a thing that you're suffering from, and that you need treatment to overcome, right? So you have to never quite see that the activity of depressing is something that you're actually doing, that you're depressing, or that you're relating in a depressive way. You have to instead convince yourself that you're the victim of a disease called depression that's just happening to you, and which really has very little to do with how you think, live, or relate. So that's an important kind of philosophical beginning. Now, a very good friend, if you want to be depressed, are feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. Now, to get really effective at this, what you want to do is that you want to ban or damn the experience of hopelessness and helplessness. Make sure that you mark those experiences out as something that you must not feel, something that has to go away. And make sure that if you experience those things, that you attach a lot of meaning to it. And make sure to interpret it as it means that something's fundamentally wrong or sick about you. See, if you take the experience or the perception of hopelessness and helplessness and you ban it and you make it forbidden, you're going to ensure that it begins to appear a lot more. And since it appears a lot more, you're going to dupe your brain into thinking that it's really significant and really important. So that's kind of a big step to damn and make unacceptable and very personal the perceptions of hopelessness and helplessness. Now, to feel a lot of hopelessness and helplessness, it really helps if you can master what Martin Seligman called the 3 Ps. So that means that whenever something happens that doesn't quite go your way, make sure to engage in the 3 Ps, meaning make sure that you interpret it as being personal, about you somehow, that you make it pervasive across all contexts, and that you make it permanent. So let's say that you flunk your exam, instead of just acknowledging that you failed at that particular exam at that particular time and look for ways to improve in the future, make sure that you deem yourself a failure and that you globally relate, rate yourself as um, a failure across contexts, and make sure to make it permanent. In that way, you can really cultivate those perceptions. And also make sure to spend a lot of time engaging in very hopeless projects. So, for example, you know, make sure to invest in ideas about how other people should be. People should be honest. People should be kind. My mother should love me. Um, my brother-in-law should be more intelligent. My aunt should have a better ethical compass. Make sure that you spend a lot of time in other people's business, creating ideas of how they or how humans should be. And then don't stop there. Demand that you need for them to be that way, and that they actually absolutely must be that way. And then every time they're not quite that way, you get to feel very strong negative emotions. And you can feel helpless about it because you truly are helpless. It's not really up to you how these people operate. But if you make it your business, and you demand that people must be that way, then you can constantly feel helpless, and you can feel a sense of hopelessness about that. You can do the same thing about the world. Create a lot of ideas of how the world should be a just place, and how there should be no wars or no global warming, or so on and so forth. But don't stop there. Make sure that you demand that therefore the world absolutely must operate that way. And then every time you kind of realize that it doesn't, you get to feel very strong negative feelings, and a sense of helplessness, and a sense of hopelessness. And you can also apply this to yourself. Make sure that you demand guarantees that you know that you can't quite have. So demand of yourself that you have to perform, that you have to be in control. Demand to need to know that your health is going to be good into the future, or that you need to know that you're going to be financially secure. So that if you simultaneously kind of know that you don't have those guarantees, then every time you think about this, you're going to react very strongly in a negative way. And it's very easy to then cultivate feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. Look at the past, look at things that happened in the past that you don't like, and then absolutely demand that things shouldn't have happened that way. And then every time you demand that things shouldn't have happened that way, and you realize that they did, you get to feel very strong negative emotions once again, and you can really cultivate that sense of helplessness and hopelessness. Make sure that you rate yourself as a failure. Make sure that when other people don't quite perform or act the way you want, that you globally rate them as bad. And make sure that whenever life doesn't quite live up to your expectations, that you globally rate life or existence itself as bad. That also really, really helps. Now, something else you want to get really good at if you want to master the art of depression is what we call emotional reasoning or mood reasoning. So, emotional reasoning essentially means that I use my own emotional state in and of itself as evidence as to what your motives or characteristics or intentions are. So let's say that you say something, I feel hurt. So I use that emotion of being hurt as evidence that that means that you meant to hurt me. And since you meant to hurt me, that means that you're a rotten human being. This is a great thing to engage in. Make sure to use your own emotional state as evidence of what other people's motives, intentions, and characteristics are, and make sure to interpret things, mind read, interpret them to have the worst possible motives imaginable. This is quite easy these days. In 2021, as I make this, we're living in a kind of, in the West at least, a time period of a very strong woke culture and political correctness and identity politics, where people are kind of being trained to view the world through a oppressor victim mindset, right? And and to attribute the worst motives to people who don't share your particular ideology. Just log on to Facebook or some sort of discussion group, and you'll see this emotional reasoning and mind reading at play all the times. This can really darken your world as well. Now, make sure that if you're in a bad mood or in a low mood, that you so I'll give you a fun example of this. So what I can do sometimes is I can get home from work in an irritable mood, right? Now the way moods work is that if you're in an irritable mood, for example, you're going to automatically outsource the source of your moods onto events and people out there, right? So if I get home in an irritable mood, it doesn't take long for my mind to make up a story of how my wife and my kids and the dog are the sources of this irritable mood that I came home with, right? And as quickly as that has happened, the mind keeps spinning as to reasons why, So now my mind will find things that need to change. And then my kids have to listen, and my wife have to agree. And if they don't, I can use my emotional reasoning to attribute to them the worst the worst possible motives, right? And in this way, you can drive yourself into really negative moods and invest a lot of meaning to them, and stay there for a long time. So make sure to never even suspect that your moods could be telling you about your own virtual reality Googles. A bit like if you have green virtual reality Googles, even the snow is going to look green. It looks as if it tells you that the entire world is green. Of course, they really do tell you about the fact that you're wearing green virtual reality goggles. But you have to never quite suspect this with your own moods. You have to, use the mood itself as evidence that your mood is kind of a readout of your life conditions. And then to drive yourself really deeply into the mood and into victimhood, you have to attach a lot of significance and meaning into these moods. And you have to try to solve these moods with your thoughts, right? So what you're going to do then is that you're going to add a lot of thinking to the moods. And that's like, pouring gasoline on the fire. That's what keeps it going, right? So whenever you're in a depressed or hopeless mood, if someone gives you a compliment, you're likely to think, oh, she's just saying that to make me feel better. Or hell, things have to be really bad for people to think they need to say those types of things to me. And then make sure to automatically believe in those interpretations. What you also want to do while you're in these low moods is you're likely to feel a sense of urgency, that things have to change. So make sure that you try to make very important decisions while you're in these low moods. Or make sure that you have very important discussions with your spouse or your kids while you're in these moods, because you're not going to see the so-called truth. You're going to see how the world looks from a low mood. So you want to make sure that you invest in it by trying to solve it all the time. Now, here's something else that you can do once you've really driven yourself into that low mood by attaching significance, adopting the victim mindset, trying to solve it with your thinking. Now is the time to try positive thinking, especially forced positive thinking, to try to use mantras or affirmations to get yourself out of the moods, right? This is a great way to depress yourself even more. Because what's very often likely to happen if you're in a really low mood and you try forced positive thinking is there's like a credibility gap between where you're at and what your positive, affirmations are trying to tell you. The gap is too big. So there's like a credibility gap. And then you can depress, around not being able to be positive. So that's even another thing to depress about, right? You can also, if you've decided that certain behaviors or goals could help you, make sure that you do a lot of positive visualization in a very associated way of achieving these things. Because what you then risk doing is that by actually visualizing and imagining that you're succeeding at these things, you're very likely to trigger a relaxation response. The typical relaxation response that you often get by completing the task. And in that way, you can ensure that you lose all motivation to actually do those things. And then you can remain passive, helpless, and hopeless. So that's a couple of ways that you can really use the power of positive thinking, affirmations, mantras, and visualizations to just reinforce the self-loathing, the helplessness, and the hopelessness. Let's see, what else do we have here? There's so many nice things you can do, Something else that's kind of important here in terms of interpersonal relationships, and that is to make sure that you use yourself as a reference when it comes to the expectancies you have of other people. So, for example, if you're punctual, make sure that you just project those expectancies onto everyone else, irrespective of how other people actually see the world or behave in the world. Make sure to use yourself as a reference when you make expectancies in terms of other people, because that increases the chances that you'll misread a lot of people, and then you can feel a lot of disappointment, and then you can have a sense of helplessness and hopelessness about that very disappointment. And that's also great. Now, in terms of staying depressed, right? There's quite a few other things that are important. So, for example, make sure to not prioritize sleep. Make sure to not prioritize sleep and getting proper sleep. That's going to muck up your moods, your immune system. It's going to make everything more difficult. And another great thing to do there is use a little alcohol to make yourself sleep. It's such a great way to trick you, because you will likely fall asleep a bit easier, but it'll prevent a lot of the deep sleep from taking place. So even if you sleep quite a bit, you're not quite getting the quality sleep. And you're likely to wake up, in the middle of the night and to kind of struggle to get back to sleep. which then has a tendency to increase your anxiety levels and help you to descend into lower moods during the day. So don't prioritize sleep. Stay up late, do video games, these sorts of things. Let's see what else do we have here. Um, well, you know, make make sure to remain depressed that you get very passive. So don't exercise, don't move your body, don't engage with the world. um, Make sure to socially isolate. uh, Given that we are social animals, make sure to avoid social interactions as much as possible. And the loneliness and the isolation can really feed your irrationality, because you don't have anyone around you anymore to kind of reality test your ideas. So the lack of sleep, lack of exercise, passivity. Make sure that you spend most of your day just thinking, just ruminating about yourself, and try to think your way out of those moods. That really is a great way to stay depressed. Um, make sure also to socialize. If you can become part of like a depression group or anxiety group, something like that, so that you can build friendships and your identity around a problem that you claim you want to solve. That's also really going to help you with your depression. You're likely to learn more strategies about how to get depressed, and you're likely to get virtue and care the more depressed you are. You're going to start competing about who's the biggest victim. And of course, if you ever don't depress as much, that's going to likely or easily get you ostracized from the group, because it's going to threaten the authority of the people who run the group. And, you know, now being happy, quickly equals risking losing your friends, or losing your social relationships, or losing your sense of identity. So if you really want to stay depressed, make sure that your identity and your social life uh, gets threatened if you're no longer depressed. What you also want to do is that you want to make sure that you learn to relate to people while depressed. You have to be completely blind to the idea that you're using depressing uh, as a communication strategy to either get love, or to set boundaries, or be significant, or stabilize your world. You have to be blind to those things, because there are some benefits to depressing. So, for example, in a chaotic world, if you deeply depress, your experience is likely to become more stable, because there are unwritten rules socially about how to deal with a depressed person. People have a tendency to either, stay away from you, or they begin to treat you as if you are the sick victim, and so if you can spend a lot of times, as the depressed person, and kind of base your life around that, you risk no longer learning to communicate directly, set boundaries efficiently, negotiate differences, uh, receive love outside of that particular role. And in that way, losing or diminishing that tendency to depress is going to look, well, depressingly scary, right? So that can also keep you in that depressive loop. Nutrition, make sure to eat a lot of sugar. Make sure to have a bad diet so that your blood sugar fluctuates a lot of the time, and that you're fatigued, and that you're kind of malnourished. That's going to also help your psychology in terms of like stabilizing low moods and really really staying there. Of course, if you can get like a welfare deal, a permanent welfare deal for depression, that's also great, because now you're getting paid to be depressed. It becomes a job, and there's a security in that, so that can also really help to stabilize things. Now let's see what else we have here. Oh yeah, make sure to avoid sunlight. Sunlight, encourages the brain to produce serotonin, which boosts your mood. So don't get sunlight. Uh, Make sure to stay in the dungeon. Like don't get sunlight. Stay there with virtual reality and video games and that sort of stuff. The great thing about virtual reality and gaming and stuff like that is that you can kind of get a lot of the benefits to some extent of having a social life, but without really any risk or any investment, right? So you're not really investing anything. You're not really building your psychological immune system, so to speak. So you can easily become a fragile wimp of sorts over time, and that's also going to help. Now, in terms of getting help, um, if you can identify with some ideology that makes you a victim, that's great. So, like for example, a third or fourth wave feminism type identity, where you as a young woman gets convinced that you're oppressed by the patriarchy and capitalism is evil, and that sort of stuff. Those sorts of identities are great, because it's really difficult to have good, close, intimate relationships. It's really difficult to have a fulfilling, meaningful life with those sorts of philosophies. If you can enter a marriage or be part of a family where your happiness kind of threatens, mom's happiness because she's depressed, and how do you dare be happy? Or where you can kind of become the depressed one in the family, where you get your prestige and your significance by having the problem that never gets solved, for example, so that can become your role, and you really have no other way of being outside of that role. Because if you leave that role, that threatens the other people's roles. If you can have a marriage partner or friends or family members whose own identities as accomplished or smart or good or caring or compassionate gets reinforced by you having the miserable, depressed role, that also can really, really help. Now, if you ever seek professional help, in addition to this, make sure to choose the right therapist. So, of course, anyone who views this as a disease and who sells you the idea that it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, that you have a broken brain of sorts, and that the solution is to take, antidepressants, that's great. You know, like 20% approximately of people who use those things for more than 5 years develop a neurological condition called tardive dyskinesia, and then you really have something to be depressed about. Of course, don't go to YouTube and watch videos such as The Myth of the Chemical Cure by the psychiatrist Joanna Moncrief, or watch the talk The Emperor's New Drugs by Irving Kirsch. where it gets revealed that antidepressants are pretty much almost entirely the placebo effect. Like don't educate yourself on those things. Just accept that it's a chemical imbalance in the brain. Now, if you can get offered like ECT, like electroconvulsive therapy as well, that's great. I mean, whatever damages your brain, you know, really, the more concussions you can get, the more. If you do ECT, what they're essentially doing is on purpose generating the equivalent of an epileptic seizure in your brain. And that damages your brain. Epileptics get put on pretty strong drugs to prevent these seizures to not damage the brain. But when you do ECT, you create them deliberately. So anything that damages your brain is great. Like, so for example, for me, I've done contact sparring for 3 decades. That can really help too. If you can get punched and kicked in the head on a regular basis, there's no guarantee, but it can be one of those things that kind of, swings the pendulum in the right way. Why not do a lot of heavy sparring and some ECT, for example? That could end up be great. In addition to that, make sure that you choose something kind of psychoanalytic, where you get to free associate and obsess about your childhood and to look for causes in your childhood without developing any insight into how you think, or make sure to outsource it. Find a hypnotherapist or some new age kook who can take you on past life explorations, where you can not only obsess about your childhood, but you can look for problems in non-existent past lives as well. That's great. Another really great one is if you can seek out some of these so-called trauma experts, and they can sell you the idea that your depression is the result of repressed memories, likely of sexual abuse, and then you can begin to search for memories, and with some luck and the right support team and the group around you, you can then begin to discover abuse that never happened. And perhaps you can blame your brother or your father or your uncle, tear the whole family apart, you know. Um, Perhaps you can even send an innocent person to jail. It's an excellent deal. A lot of people have done this, and it's broken up so many families, and hardly anyone, improves. So find one of these kind of neo-Freudian feminist type therapist who believes in repressed memories and who really sells you the victim role, and go look for repressed memories. Learn to interpret every body pain, every nightmare, everything as sign that these things must be emerging. You can spend a lot of time and a lot of energy in therapy, and um, just get more and more depressed over time. So these are some of the top strategies. Oh, also, it really helps if you can have a belief in a just world. This belief that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. So that if you happen to drive yourself into a, a depressed place, that you somehow deserve it, and that it says something really, really bad. Of course, the way out of that can be the whole victim thing, and the whole, you can kind of alternate back and forth. It's a very seductive and appealing thing, because if let's say you're a woman in your late 20s, you're a bit entitled, perhaps a bit narcissistic, but life hasn't quite turned out the way you want it to. You know, to be sold the idea that there are these repressed memories that need to be dug up and relived, and to be healed, it's such a great alibi because then you can buy into the story that my life would have been great and I would have accomplished this and that hadn't it been for this thing. You know, you can it's such a fantastic alibi. So that's something to really deeply consider as well. Now, I usually offer to for people who want to do change work to reach out to me at provocativehypnosis.com. But if your intent is to really deeply master these strategies, I think I've given you people who are way more qualified and better candidates than me to help you achieve that. So, any questions, any comments around this? Please leave them at the very place that you find this video. Again, thanks for listening.